Remove that ridiculous hat. This is a court of law, not Buckingham Palace." The judge's voice echoed sharply through the silent courtroom, drawing every eye to the man standing tall near the witness stand. Corporal Daniel Wright, dressed in the full ceremonial uniform of the Queen's Guard, didn't move. His crimson tunic, polished boots, and towering bearskin hat made him impossible to ignore. The judge scowled. "Do you think this is some kind of theater?" he added. "Take it off, now." But Daniel stood firm, and what he said next wasn't loud. Yet it froze the room in silence. Moments later, it would make everyone in that courtroom rise to their feet and applaud. Before we show you what happened next, hit subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Because this story isn't about a hat. It's about honor. Corporal Daniel Wright had served in the Queen's Guard for over 11 years. For him, discipline wasn't just routine. It was a way of life. Every day began before dawn, with crisp folds, polished boots, and a quiet sense of duty that never wavered. In his small flat, above a shelf neatly lined with shoe polish and white gloves, hung a single framed photo, a younger Daniel in uniform, standing beside his late father, also a guardsman. The photo was faded, but the memory was sharp. He could still hear his father's voice, steady and proud. "This hat isn't for show. It's a legacy." Today, Daniel wasn't reporting to palace duty or a ceremonial parade. He was walking into a courtroom, not as a soldier under orders, but as a man called to testify. His friend and fellow guardsman, Corporal Malik Dawson, had been accused of misconduct after a brief altercation with a tourist. The media was already turning it into scandal, but Daniel knew better. Malik was honorable, and someone needed to stand up for him. He could have worn a suit, could have sat quietly and blended in like everyone else. But he didn't. He chose the uniform. He chose the boots, the gloves, the bearskin hat. Not to make a statement, but to remind the room of what service looks like. Because sometimes you don't dress for attention. You dress to represent something bigger than yourself. Courtroom 4B was already half full when Corporal Daniel Wright walked through its double doors. His entrance, in full ceremonial uniform, turned heads immediately. The bright, crimson tunic, gold buttons, and towering bearskin hat stood in stark contrast to the dark suits and hushed tones of the courtroom. A wave of quiet whispers passed through the gallery, surprised, curious, and slightly reverent. "Is that a real royal guard?" someone murmured. A child pointed. Even a bailiff paused, unsure whether to salute or just stare. Daniel moved with quiet purpose, never breaking stride. He took his place near the front, his posture perfect, his expression neutral. But the moment Judge Harold Dempsey entered and saw him, everything shifted. The judge stopped in his tracks, his brow furrowed as he took in the sight. With a sharp voice, he addressed the court, but his words were clearly aimed at one man. "Take off that hat. You're not on parade." Daniel turned slightly, standing tall and composed. His tone was calm, controlled. "I appear on behalf of Her Majesty's Guard, Your Honor, in uniform, by direction of my regiment." The judge's expression tightened. "This is a courtroom, Corporal, not Buckingham Palace. I won't repeat myself. Remove it, or I will hold you in contempt." A hush fell over the room. Even the sound of shuffling papers stopped. At the defense table, Malik Dawson, seated, eyes lowered, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, visibly embarrassed. He avoided eye contact with his friend. It wasn't the reaction they had expected, but among the public gallery, a shift was happening. A few faces began to frown, not at Daniel, but at the judge. An elderly veteran in the back straightened up and gave a silent nod. A mother whispered something to her daughter. And though the judge didn't notice it yet, the room was slowly turning, not against the man in the red uniform, but against the one behind the bench. Just as the tension in the courtroom reached its peak, the heavy doors creaked open once more. Every head turned as a sharply dressed man in a navy suit entered, confident, composed, carrying a leather folder marked with the royal crest. Without speaking, he walked directly to the clerk's desk and handed over a sealed envelope. The clerk took it carefully, then crossed to the bench and passed it to Judge Dempsey. The judge glanced at the crest, paused, then broke the seal. His eyes scanned the document. Slowly, the color in his face began to shift. He adjusted his glasses, read again, and then cleared his throat. "This court has received official correspondence from the office of His Royal Highness, Prince William," he said, his voice tight. "It confirms that Corporal Daniel Wright is appearing today in an official capacity, in uniform, at the request of the Royal Guard. His attire is appropriate and authorized under ceremonial protocol." There was a long silence. A few people blinked in surprise. Even Malik, who had seemed defeated just minutes earlier, looked up for the first time. Judge Dempsey looked visibly uncomfortable, but he had no choice. He gave a short nod toward Daniel. "You may remain, as you are." The shift in the courtroom was immediate, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. Where there had been uncertainty, now there was respect. Daniel hadn't said a word since his last statement, but something had changed. He no longer stood out awkwardly. He belonged. He moved toward the witness stand, each step precise, each movement deliberate. When he sat, he did so with the composure of a man used to representing something far bigger than himself. Back straight, chin level, eyes steady. In that moment, without speaking, he commanded the room. The courtroom grew still as Corporal Daniel Wright took the stand, his tall frame composed, hands folded neatly in his lap. The black bearskin hat cast a dignified shadow across his brow. He didn't fidget or shift. He simply sat, still, present, and commanding, without saying a word. The prosecutor, a polished young man in a slim gray suit, approached with thinly veiled disdain. "Well," the prosecutor began with a smirk, "is the hat necessary, Corporal? Or do you just enjoy playing soldier for tourists?" There was a flicker of discomfort in the gallery. A few people exchanged glances. One or two even gave a short, uneasy chuckle, but it died quickly. Daniel didn't react. His voice was calm, unwavering. "We don't stand still for effect," he said. "We stand still because duty doesn't flinch. It's not for photos, it's for presence." The prosecutor hesitated, but Daniel continued. "This uniform has stood through weddings and funerals, through bomb threats and royal processions. It has endured under the sun at changing of the guard and in the rain outside Westminster Abbey. We wear it not because it's easy, but because it means something, to us and to the people we protect." Then his tone softened, becoming personal. "My father wore this same bearskin hat in Afghanistan. He was a guardsman, too. When he died, it was laid across his coffin. I don't wear it for ceremony. I wear it because it's part of who I am. And I wear it because I made him a promise." The prosecutor shifted his footing, visibly thrown off, but made one last attempt. "Still," he said with a forced smile, "it's just tradition, isn't it? A uniform. This whole look. It's more about show than substance." Daniel turned to face him fully. His voice didn't rise, but there was a new edge of steel in it. "This is not a costume," he said. "It's a statement. that service still means something, that sacrifice still matters. The room fell into complete silence, not a shuffle, not a cough. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Even the judge sat motionless, pen hovering above his notepad. Whatever assumptions people had brought into that courtroom, they were gone now. Daniel Wright wasn't just wearing history. He was it. For a long moment after Daniel finished speaking, the courtroom remained frozen in silence. The air felt heavier, as if no one dared to disturb what had just been said. Then, from the back row, a sound broke through, soft, deliberate, a single clap. It echoed slightly off the wood-paneled walls. Another followed, then another. Within seconds, the gallery was on its feet. Lawyers, spectators, even a bailiff rose and joined in, until the entire courtroom was standing, applauding not with wild enthusiasm, but with quiet, respectful awe. Daniel didn't move. He simply sat, steady as ever, receiving none of it as flattery, only as acknowledgment, not of himself, but of what he represented. Judge Dempsey, who just minutes earlier had threatened him with contempt, looked down at his bench. Slowly, he set aside his pen, removed his glasses, and let out a long breath. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. "Corporal Wright," he said gently, almost quietly, "I forgot what your uniform stood for. I saw it and assumed it was ceremony, theater. But I was wrong. I apologize." There was another ripple through the crowd, not of applause this time, but of something deeper, understanding. The judge turned his attention to the case. In light of the testimony provided, and the integrity with which it was delivered, he said, the court finds no grounds to proceed further. The charges against Corporal Malik Dawson are hereby dismissed. Malik looked up, stunned, then slowly turned to Daniel. No words passed between them, but none were needed. Daniel hadn't shouted. He hadn't argued. He hadn't fought. And yet he had changed the room by standing still and speaking truth. Outside the courthouse, the air was buzzing. Reporters stood clustered behind barriers, cameras flashing as Corporal Daniel Wright stepped down the stone steps in full uniform. A young journalist pushed through the crowd, holding out a microphone. "Corporal Wright," she asked, "why didn't you just take the hat off when the judge asked? It could have saved you a lot of trouble." Daniel paused, then looked at her, not with annoyance, but with quiet conviction. "Some things aren't worn for approval," he said. "They're worn because they mean something." That single sentence was all he offered, but it was enough. The cameras kept flashing, but the moment already belonged to something greater. Across the city, behind the high walls of Buckingham Palace, a quiet office overlooked the gardens. Prince William sat by a polished desk, reading a formal report. He didn't rush. His eyes moved slowly across the page, taking in every detail, every insult, every reply, every word Daniel had said. When he reached the end, a faint smile touched his lips. "That's the kind of man I want standing guard," he said to no one in particular, and slid the file aside. Later that evening, back in the quiet of his barracks, Daniel opened the door to his room. The light was dim, the familiar scent of polish and cloth in the air. On his bed lay a small cream-colored envelope, unsealed, marked with the royal crest. He opened it and read the handwritten note inside. "You reminded a courtroom what dignity looks like." He stood still for a long moment, then moved toward the small table in the corner. Gently, with the same care he used every morning, Daniel removed his bearskin hat and placed it beside the framed photo of his father. He looked at the image. 2 guardsmen, father and son, standing shoulder to shoulder in matching uniforms. His voice barely above a whisper, he said, still standing, Dad. Sometimes strength isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with shouting, fists, or defiance. Sometimes it walks into a room quietly, stands still, and wears red. Sometimes dignity doesn't need to prove itself. It just needs to be seen. Corporal Daniel Wright didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand respect. He simply represented it. In a world quick to judge by appearances, he reminded an entire courtroom that tradition, honor, and quiet conviction still matter. And now we ask you, have you ever stood your ground for something sacred, even when others didn't understand? Was Daniel right to keep the uniform on? Or should he have followed the judge's order and blended in? Let us know what you would have done in the comments below. And if this story moved you, subscribe to our channel for more real and inspiring Royal Guard stories. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And share this video with someone who still believes that respect is earned through integrity, not titles or appearances.